And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Louis Bourgeois, who has had 4 experiences with death, including one near-death experience. Louis, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. And if you don't mind, Louis, let's start with your NDE first and then go from there.
Okay, well, great. I was 36 years old. I was in early recovery. And in my early recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction, I got super into bike riding and running and super fitness and all this. So this event happened during a race in Falmouth, Massachusetts, where I was running a 7 mile race. And it was a pretty famous event. A lot of big stars at the time, Frank Shorter and a few other, Bill Rogers, big time marathoners. And so anyway, a lot of media, helicopters, cameras, and all that. So I was pretty psyched, to really do my best. And I overdid it. I actually got angry because in this event, because it's an media event, a lot of the local people, they call them gypsy runners. They just enter the race. They're not registered. They're wearing funny costumes. They're all drinking, and it's a party for them. So these people are all in my way. Here I'm wanting to get my personal best. I was wanting to be not one of the elite runners, which I'm not, but I wanted to do my best. And so I got angry. I was carrying water bottles. I never took a sip of water. I'm just kind of weaving around all these fools. And, next thing I know is I'm in a ice bath in a medic tent. They had pulled me off the course because with heat stroke, you can still function, and pretty soon you're weaving, and they can tell this person's going to die. Their brain is frying, and I'm sure people have seen it actually during the Olympics or whatever. Marathoners on a hot day, you have to be careful not to overheat. Heat stroke is deadly, and in my case, so 5 medics are working on my body, and suddenly I'm out of my body. I'm up top of the tent like a typical NDE, watching them, really being concerned about my body. One of them is trying to get me to respond. Can you feel anything? What's going on? And suddenly the person that was monitoring my blood pressure, and they said, we're losing him, like it dropped too fast, and they got to pull the body out of the ice water. And so anyway, as soon as they said we're losing him, now I'm off. And I had a lot of experience, which maybe will come up in my story later, with near-death experience. I'd studied it. It's sort of consciousness is my what I studied in university and graduate school. Dr. Kenneth Ring was one of the leading, he was the founder of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. He was a mentor of mine in the beginning. So I knew tons about near-death experience. So now I'm having one, and I'm like, ooh, this is great. I want to go to the light. I got to get in the tunnel. I want to go. This is really going to be fun, because I know just from my research that it's not going to be a bad experience, unless they don't bring me back. But even then, death is not a bad experience. Something that people who've had one or more experiences with death, they come to see death in a totally different way. So anyway, I'm excited about it. And then all of a sudden I'm halfway out to wherever, and a voice comes into my head, my egoic voice, saying, your mom is going to be really disappointed that you're dead. And your 2 buddies that you came to run the race with, they're going to be disappointed. Where'd our buddy go? He was going to have this great race, and we never he never finished the race. What happened? They find out 2 hours later that, he died. And friends that I was going to visit the next day in Maine, he never showed up. And maybe it takes them 2 weeks to find out. Oh my gosh, you see the obituary? This guy that we know is coming to visit us. He died in the Falmouth road race. So anyway, this voice was making a complaint. And then my other higher self said, all right, okay, we don't have to die. And so right away, I'm back in not any longer the ice bath. I have my body on a gurney. And they're this woman saying, can you feel anything? Can you feel anything? And she'd been sticking a rectal thermometer, where. And I said, yeah, my asshole hurts. And they're like, yeah, he's back. So I was back, and I had a horrible headache, and they brought me to the hospital. Obviously, I'm here, I recovered. So it was a relatively mild near-death experience compared to other experiences I've had. And of course, you've had many people on that have had quite amazing experiences where they're out there for hours, and it might even seem like longer because, of course, when you drop your body, you're entering eternity or the timeless realm. So you could be gone for 5 minutes, but it might seem like 3 months. But anyway, mine just seemed like about 15 minutes of mischief, but it was not as significant as what happened 3 years before this.
Louis, you mentioned two different voices speaking to you. One was your egoic, and one was your higher self or some other part of higher self. What's the difference between the two?
Okay, well, I actually have a name now for my higher self. I call it's Sun King. And what I've learned from all of my experiences, including what happened when I was 21, where I was introduced, well, to what I call at the time the voice. You know, the time people go through experiences where they believe that some entity is talking to them, or the Holy Spirit, or an angel, or God itself, or whatever. I mean, in my understanding, that's basically a form of hallucination, that you're just imagining what that voice is, when in fact what I learned is that it was my own higher self all along, from the very beginning, that got me on this 50-year spiritual odyssey. So that voice was my own higher self going, okay, it's not time now, because my higher self knows what I'm supposed to be doing right now. You know, here I am now, 72 years old, and I'm having this conversation with you and your audience. That was the whole purpose of my life and the NDE and my other death experiences. The purpose was to basically slap me and go, stop being an, follow guidance. Don't be arrogant. Don't think, oh, because that's where most people run into troubles, the thing called hubris. You know, they're not humble. They have this thing like here I am 3 years in recovery. I'm thinking, like, wow, I'm going to be a superstar. You know, here before I was an alcoholic, drug addict, loser. And now I'm going to be like, I was giving AA talks all the time. And, I was like, I wanted to be on the A list of people in recovery. And that's a problem. That's a problem when you get your ego involved, and it's like, oh, aren't I special? And again, the whole thing that I had to learn and the other death experiences that we'll talk about showed me big time, I'm not in charge. Louis Bourgeois is clearly not running the show. Now, it took me a long time to understand that was what I now call Sun King that was running the show. But for a while, I had to believe that, oh, it was my Father God, or it was Jesus, because these are the entities that came to me and were teaching me. But eventually, the message from Jesus, especially, is and I had a dream once that I could share, very, very compelling dream, where Jesus was telling me, you're as much a pilot as I am. Like, you are the same as me. And that's, pretty radical truth. Like I'd mentioned earlier before we started recording, that I had a long time, 25-year devotion to A Course in Miracles. And so Jesus was very, I resisted having a relationship with Jesus, but I eventually took him on as a brother, as a teacher, and eventually I got the message of A Course in Miracles that you are the light of the world. Each of us has that potential to be a conduit, just like he was, right? And he had the humility to say, hey, I'm nothing special. It's my relationship with the Father, what he called God, that was meaningful, and that's what gave him the power that he had. It wasn't him, though. That's the key. That's what my ND especially was to say, hey, stop around. Sorry, I may have to bleep that out. But you don't be, pay attention. But the first and the next death experience, these are the things when I share, these are the things that radically slapped me up the side of the head. Like, pay attention, buddy, because this is serious business. You have a destiny to fulfill, and you're not going to blow it. Now I would say me, my own higher self, is telling my stupid human self, don't blow it. Don't ruin what will become a beautiful thing. And luckily, the story that I can share at the end of all this, that I'm sitting here today, 72, I've got a beautiful 8-year-old daughter and a really remarkable wife, living a very simple life in this Andean paradise in Ecuador. And so that was the happy ending that was promised. But I never really believed could happen. And so most people, including myself, run all kinds of interference patterns with one's own destiny because you can't really accept something as simple and beautiful as what I can express today. Because it's not about becoming famous, it's not about becoming rich, it's not about becoming like I'm saying, like this egoic monster. That's exactly not the point. And so what I had mentioned earlier before we started recording is what I want to talk about today or demonstrate is there's this paradox that would say that in order to truly do something great, you have to be simple, you have to be humble, you have to become empty. So the greatness that is, the divine universe, it can express itself through you. You're just a vessel. And so the big teaching of A Course in Miracles and other spiritual paths is the body and the person isn't what's meaningful. It's simply a communication device. And I happen to have a good communication device in that I've practiced writing from the time that I was 21. So I'm a really expert writer. And now, because of AA, really, I became a very good speaker because I was very good at getting up in front of a group and speaking clearly and speaking with a lot of emotion, especially in the beginning, because, AA people, they love it when you're crying all the time. And, oh, my life was such a disaster. And, now I'm saved by God. And, oh, thank you, God. And so now I'm at a much more mature stage in that development, but I still have the same reverence for this divine power that sort of chose me. And in the language of Course in Miracles, it says that everyone is called, but few choose to answer the call. So what I'd like to jump back to with your audience is telling them how I answered the call at the age of 21.
All right, before we go there, there's a couple more questions I want to ask you. The voice that people hear, which sometimes people may interpret as Jesus or an angel or God or whatever, is our higher self intentionally making us believe that we hear that voice, or are we doing that?
We are doing that. And again, this is so important for people to understand is that the magnificence of the divine, what people normally call God, the magnificence of that is so far beyond our ability to comprehend or accept that we have to make up a story about it. We're basically bringing it through a filter. So if my filter is A Course in Miracles, the filter, I would hear the voice and even see the hallucination as Jesus. I mean, in fact, my hallucination of Jesus, you're probably too young to remember, but there was a TV show called The Wild Wild West back in the 1970s. And Robert Conrad played Wild Wild West. So my hallucination of Jesus was Robert Conrad, strikingly good looking and whatever, but always it was him. He would always show up in that. So obviously I was making that up, right? Because Jesus doesn't look like Robert Conrad. But the whole point is Jesus doesn't look like anything we would even imagine him to look like. I mean, most people are very confused and people think, oh, Jesus was this white guy and all that. But the people that actually probably know more about the area where he grew up, he said, well, no, he's probably more looking Arab or Muslim or something like that, as for whatever. So, but to answer your question more simply, I know today that voice was always me, not me, Louis, me, Sun King. And I can speak with great authority about what Sun King is. I mean, again, Sun King would be my interpretation of the divine that called to a human being to serve as its messenger, as its ambassador. And so we eventually will co-create with the divine what this messenger looks like, what the messenger sounds like, because of the particular stories, that I have. My story might be compelling to certain people, especially my India story, which is my third death experience. So the whole story is being orchestrated to make the messenger believable, to make the messenger accessible. Like I can talk with people today and I can tell some stories that would say, whoa, he's as ordinary a human being as anybody else. He's got all his own peccadillos and all of that. So that's really important. And most of the great ones that I know have always said that the parts of my humanity that look ugly to you, that look like this doesn't make sense. You'd be such a powerful spiritual master and be an alcoholic or be this or be that, be a womanizer. A lot of these men, especially Trungpa and many of them, Osho, they usually get in trouble with money and sex, right? And that's part of their hubris, part of actually what allows them to stay in the world. Because some people would teach, the whole thing is to ascend, just to become, and if that was true, then usually when people have this near-death experience, they just wouldn't come back. But the whole point is to come back. And when people tell the story about why they came back, they again might interpret it like, I don't want to, but I have to. But that's what the divine wants us to do, to have this experience so that we open ourselves to the divine presence and then come back and tell your story. And that's why it's so important what you're doing and other podcasters that focus on these experiences. It's very important that everybody hears, because what we want is that the average person can relate to the person that has the NDE. It's not like, the NDE was so special that they had it and you didn't. It's like, we just got a sneak preview. It's going to happen to everybody. Everybody's going to drop their body someday. Everybody's going to have a very near-death experience and probably not come back. But if you do it several times and come back, it's the same thing. It's just, you're just seeing what's there and coming back. And the point is to tell other people so they're not afraid. Right? And that's the main thing. If humans could overcome their fear of death, we would have a much better society, a much better world, because so many people do all the stupid things they do because they're afraid of death. So they get egoic and they become monsters. They want to, be capitalist giants or be spiritual masters or something very egoic. And it's all about being kind. It's all about being, ordinary. Like I said, this Taoist expression, common as a stone. Like you want, and especially if you have a great message, and a lot of us have a great message, but how does that message like change us as humans? And so again, if I had come out in my 30s, after my first major death experience or this NDE, it would have been a disaster. So the guidance that I had mentioned before that say, okay, you've got the spiritual destiny of greatness, but you've got to pray to stay small. You've got to stay small. Only then can you accomplish something great. Because if you get egoic about it, if you get attached to being something special, my human self, then you're in trouble. And we see many, many examples of people in all kinds of walks of life, not just, spirituality, but just getting confused because it's very difficult for people to handle power, great power. And so this is, again, what the voice is saying. Okay, you're going to be asked to handle great power one day, but not yet. Don't do it yet. You're not ready yet. You're not ready at 35, 45, 55, 65. In fact, my last death experience was at the age of 66. And it was to show me you're not ready yet. Okay, it was only earlier this year, turning 72 in September, it was around May that this voice, my voice, really my higher self, said, it's time to start. As of your birthday, this year, 72, you're finally solid enough in your life, you're grounded enough, you're common enough, where this is not gonna make you into, this isn't gonna ruin your life, ruin your marriage, hurt your daughter. These are things that happen to men if they suddenly assume a level of power that they don't know how to handle. And so again, like Jesus said and all the masters, you have to understand the power is not of you. It's not of you. And so this is, again, why I got slapped so hard, not the NDE, but the first death experience, the second one in India, and even the one at 66, saying, calm down. You have to get to this place of calmness and solidity in order for this message to come through, this uber powerful message. Without it, see, again, part of the thing is the message itself would be corrupted. Like I wrote an amazing book when I was 28. If I had published that book at 28, it was called The Great Aha, Genius, Creativity, and God. I mean, it was like an amazing book. And I had a number of people tell me, this is an amazing book. Well, it wasn't time. So that book had to be squashed. And luckily I knew enough to squash. I burned the manuscript. But I had another book that I had written at, gosh, I don't know, about this book, Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. The publisher that published Power of Now wanted to publish this book. That was like in 2005. I wasn't ready. It wasn't, if that book had published then, I would have just gone off the side rails. I personally, I knew I had to get out of the USA. I knew in 2001, I had to get out of the USA. I had to find a place that would be more safe and more like anchoring, more of a solid anchoring place. And so, literally, I mentioned earlier when we were just chatting, this place where I am is this Taoist paradise because it has like zero interference patterns. Like it's perfectly balanced, the energy. So again, this is what we want to find in ourselves, a perfect level of balance where things aren't going to throw us. They're not going to make us go up or down or all around. And so the idea to be a good teacher is to actually be a demonstration of the message, not just talking the talk, but you have to be able to live it. So I'm in a place now where I literally chop wood, carry water. I have a very simple life. I live on $800 a month, my Social Security. It's like there's nothing special about me or my life. And that's the simplicity that always my guidance, which was my higher self, ultimately was saying that's what you need to find and build that. Then you can start giving this message, because what'll happen is they'll hear the message, they go, holy, wow, this guy's on fire. This guy is, la, 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 la. They'll try to make something of me. And I'll just have to say to them, excuse me, go yourself, because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play that game. I don't want to be famous. I don't want your money. I don't want whatever. So getting a little bit off the tangent, but the whole purpose of the little NDE and these other death experiences were to get me in a place where I absolutely knew shit from Shinola. I knew what was real, what was fake. I wasn't going to misinterpret it. I wasn't going to misrepresent it. And so that's my point today, is to be as clear as I can with your audience, saying, like, I know like the essence of God, and I know the essence of our function as humans if we're going to be in a relationship with this divine power, what that relationship is meant to be. And again, you said you're familiar with the Course of Miracles. So that pretty clearly lays it out, what the Course was supposed to be, not about fighting with the ego and trying to become a better person or anything. It's right in the end when the benediction, when Jesus says, through you is ushered in a world unseen, unheard, yet truly there. That's what any NDer is going to say. I was exposed to a world that you wouldn't understand because it's not visible. It's not anything that our rational mind can understand. But imagine that power of that statement, that through you is ushered in this majesty, this kingdom of heaven. And literally that's our function, is to manifest this kingdom of heaven on planet Earth. That I know without a doubt.
Well, let's go back in time and please tell us what happened to you at the age of 21.
Right. Yeah. So here it is, 1974 spring. I'm in my last semester at the University of Connecticut. And I was a very ordinary guy. I'd actually been, the first year of my academic life was at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado. I wanted to be a military fighter pilot like my father had been. And I was on a very straight and narrow path. I got thrown out of there. Of course, that had to happen because that was not my destiny to become a military man. So here I am at University of Connecticut. I went to a place that wasn't going to be challenging at all because the academy was too challenging. So I met this place, but I had met this guy, Ken Ring, that I mentioned. He's the one that was the founder of International Association of Near-Death Studies. He was a young professor. He was basically teaching social psychology, but he was interested in spiritual things. So he had a class that was like just called like Introduction to Transpersonal Psychology. It was going through the experimental college. It wasn't like an accredited course. But when I saw that on his door, I knew I have to take that class with Ken. And so I'm in the class. Ken does this amazing. So the class is all about consciousness and astral projection and all kinds of things that have to do with, lucid dreaming and whatever. So one class he has us doing this guided death ritual where we're imagining ourselves dead, laying on a raft, going down this little canal, beautiful flowers all along the canal. Everything's peaceful and lovely. And during this experience, I'm laying on this carpeted floor, and I start hearing this drum, bum, bum, and it's getting louder and louder, bum, 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 and I'm freaking out, and I'm laying on the floor, and so I can open my eyes, but I can't stop this trance experience that was going on. And so the drumming gets louder. I'm starting to suffocate. I'm getting all sweaty and hot, and suddenly there's the light, and I start crying, and I go up to Ken afterwards, go, Ken, what just happened? I told him my experience. He goes, you just remembered your birth. You had a visceral memory of your birth, and that experience is what triggered what would happen in a few days. Because I think by opening this portal that included the beginning of my incarnation, my birth, that a portal opened, and through that portal came this voice. I'm studying all alone late at night for a statistics exam for psychology for, I think it was a midterm exam. And this voice comes to me saying very clearly, you're to break your engagement to Janet. You're to quit the university. You're to get rid of all your possessions, get in your car, and head west. Now, most anybody would go, what a crazy, stupid thing that was. What was that? But for me, it was like, oh my God. I mean, I didn't have any belief in God at the time. I would certainly have called myself agnostic, if not atheist. But that voice was so compelling that I remember the next day sitting with Janet, my fiance, the love of my life, and saying, I'm really sorry. This is terrible because I know we have a beautiful relationship and my life, I had it plotted out ahead of me. I was going to become a professor like my two older sisters. We were all academics. And that was over. And I said, I'm sorry, I have to break the engagement. I have to do what this voice is asking me to do. So it took me 3 weeks, her crying, throwing my engagement ring at me, or her engagement ring, and just the trauma of that. But I just knew inside, I have to do this. Even though my mother said I was crazy. I mean, everybody, of course, said I was crazy, but I did it. So here I am in my car, and I end up running out of money in like Lake Tahoe, California. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm sure this is not what the voice meant, is spending a fun summer in Lake Tahoe. But I just knew I had to sort of wait for the next bit of information. But the fact that I did that I accepted the voice's authority, even though I didn't believe in it, and I did it, it made all the difference in the world. And everything subsequent to that would always be simply because I said yes, that I'll do this. And eventually what that was about was to get me to San Francisco. And I had a feeling that's where I was supposed to get, but like I said, I ran out of money. So I ended up getting a job at Harrah's Casino in South Lake Tahoe, and just spending a summer kind of hanging out and playing with some buddies and just kind of waiting for the next bit of guidance. But my sense, because Ken had talked to me about the school in San Francisco, that was the first school that sort of integrated Asian spirituality with Western psychology. It was called the California Institute of Asian Studies. Now it's called Integral Studies. Anyway, the whole purpose of this thing, it was me to get down there and check out the school. And I said, I think I'm supposed to matriculate. And she says, well, this is a graduate school program, so you have your bachelor's degree, right? You go, well, actually, no, I quit. So you have to get your bachelor's degree. So not to stretch the story out any longer, so I had to go through a 1.5-year process to get my degree and get back there, matriculate, so that I could have this experience with this diminutive saint, this woman from Burma. She was teaching this comparative Buddhist studies class, and I'm in the class with her, and probably 3-4 weeks into the class, I'm like bored, I'm falling asleep in the back of the class. Anyway, one morning, I think just the same day of the class, that morning I had this vision where I saw this word oasis. I saw myself in this beautiful light-filled room. I was some kind of guru, some kind of spiritual teacher, and that was that. And I remember telling a roommate of mine, Sheldon, about it. He's all excited, like, wow, that'd be amazing. We can have this ashram, and I'd love to get into alternative energy systems. And we just had fun laughing for a couple hours about this crazy vision I had. Anyway, that day in class with Arena, she pulls me aside after class and says, I need to speak with you privately. And I'm like, wow, she's gonna chastise me for falling asleep in her class or what? So 2 days later, Saturday morning, I'm knocking on her door. She had a little room on the top floor of the Institute. She opens the door, puts her fingers on my third eye. I collapse. And I just, this was my first experience with what I would call the love of God. So this was this incredibly powerful experience that literally, I said, my knees went out from under me. I collapsed on the floor and she held me in her arms and rocked me. And she said to me, I saw in your eyes, you have the brow of David, and your destiny is to become a great spiritual teacher. I was like in shock, like, that's like crazy. That's like, I remember walking down Dolores Boulevard later, just going that this is impossible. How could someone as ordinary and relatively broken, you had a pretty broken childhood, how could someone as ordinary as me become something great? And I remember this voice, the same voice always was me, my higher self, going, well, if you're going to be really great someday, first, like I think the voice said, if you're going to be something very good someday, first you have to be very bad. And I remember thinking like, oh, I can do that. So I just remember thinking, okay, all right. And again, sort of like putting the whole thing with Rena in the back of my mind. And I spent the next years just going on this wild binge of badness, drinking and drugs and women and just running all over the country and just kind of going crazy. Like it would seem at the time like I was like running away from my destiny, but in fact, I would come to realize I was just burning through a lot of that karmic stuff, being like my father, who was an alcoholic, womanizing fool. And I remember actually a friend of mine in Boulder, Colorado, who knew me pretty well, and he saw what was happening. He goes, you got to tell I think you're becoming just like your dad. And I remember just like thinking, like I'm 32 years old, thinking like, oh my God, it's true. I am. And I remember going back to my homeland, Hartford, Connecticut, getting into therapy. And my therapist was working with me every week saying, kind of describe the whole thing about you got all these problems and here's drugs and here's alcohol. And it aggravates your problems even more. To get out of the situation, you're going to need to get sober. You're going to need to go to treatment. And I'm like every week going, yeah, well, he would just ask me each time, like, is it bad enough yet? Does it hurt enough yet? And my life was spiraling into very dark places. I mean, places that I don't really want to talk about openly in front of your audience, but very dark. I mean, like Taxi Driver dark, if you know Robert De Niro and Taxi Driver, like I was really like putting myself in a situation where I was likely to get killed because I just didn't have any way I just didn't know how to cross the bridge to get back on the good side of the bridge. And so anyway, the first death experience, this was a radical thing. I was drunk out of my mind Sunday night, driving home. It was early November. This was a wet, blustery night in Connecticut. My buddy from the restaurant bar I was working at was following me. We were going to go back to my place and drink some more and shoot some darts. They had blue laws back then in Connecticut where they had to close all the bars down at 11 p.m. So anyway, this is the setup. I'm in this old Jeep, and I remember just thinking, because you have to put a seatbelt on these old Jeeps to pretty much stay steady in your seat. And I remember thinking, screw that. I'm not going to wear my seatbelt. About a half mile down the road, I'm going way too fast, drunk out of my mind, like I said, and the Jeep spun out, hit a curb, snapped a telephone pole. It landed on top of a bunch of cars in a car dealership lot. And the car was totally destroyed. And I know that my body had to be totally destroyed. It was a fatal accident. But what was going on inside the car was there was this cocoon of love, just like when Rena had touched me here, and I'd felt this cocoon of God's love embracing me, telling me, you can't die and you can't be hurt. Like, I love you so much. I'm going to protect you, take care of you. Sure enough, at the end of the wreck, I'm climbing out of it, laughing hysterically. And my friend is just like in disbelief. hears, sirens are coming. And I said, get out of here, because you don't want to be like an accomplice to this drunk guy getting in an accident. Anyway, the next day in therapy, this was Sunday night, I always saw my therapist on a Monday morning. He asked me again, is it bad enough yet? And I had the audacity to still say no, but it was bad enough yet. In fact, when I finished the therapy with him and went back into my kitchen and collapsed, and just for the first time in my life, I just cried out to the universe, I can't do this anymore. I surrender. Please help me. I'm just crying. And again, this beautiful embrace from behind goes, like rocking me, like, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And so a few days later, I was in treatment. And, that led up to the NDE that was, 3 years almost into my sobriety. But the most compelling thing that probably happened was, again, as I'm going along and I'm gaining spiritual knowledge and I'm gaining emotional health, because, at the time of my first crash, I hadn't done any real healing yet. I'd seen the therapist. That was just to get me in treatment. The treatment, and I was in a 6-month halfway house, and I lived for the first couple of years in Amherst, Massachusetts, in a total cocoon of safety. I didn't drive a car, just rode a bicycle. I just was basically starting over, learning how to live in the world. And it was a very sweet cocoon or womb that I was being sort of rebirthed. And I had this beautiful woman, older woman that was teaching A Course in Miracles, Claire Ludlow, that took me under her wing, and she and her husband really became like my surrogate parents. Because part of my journey was realizing that my parents, my biological family, was not my family. It was an abusive, I had to find another way. I had to find another way to live in the world. And part of my healing was to first tell my dad, I can't see you, Dad, for 5 years. And later I did it with the same thing with my mom. You're not my mom anymore. And all of that stuff. There's enough grist for the mill here to go on for 3 hours, but I won't. I'll skip forward to the fact that, again, as I was gaining some spiritual knowledge and emotional stability, I started to feel for the first time in my life, very like I could sense the possibility of my growth, leading me to the place of my vision and the destiny to be, some kind of a meaningful spiritual teacher someday. But always there was going to be this hubris that I would have to contend with. And part of the hubris that I had at the time, getting ready to turn 40, was I remember thinking, well, if I'm going to be like a spiritual giant, I need to go to India. I need to go to the sort of the source of, the Ganges, and do the Hindu pilgrimage trail. And probably on this thing, I'm going to have a face-to-face with an Indian sadhu, and he's going to give me a look and go, yes, I see it. You are the chosen one. And, I just this, again, this crazy thought, this interference pattern that would come up that's part of the ego, because the ego doesn't know how to handle spiritual power, right? So still confused, thinking that somehow I had to handle it, Louis Bourgeois. So India was like a horrible nightmare. I planned this thing right before my birthday because I wanted to be in Kathmandu when I turned 40. And so I'm going in August, and August is monsoon. Horrible time to be in India. Dead bodies everywhere, flooding everywhere. It's just like insane. And both my travel partner and I got violently ill. Luckily, she recuperated in a couple of days. I didn't. And she was like basically putting hot compresses on my forehead during this 3-day vigil where I had a fever of 107 degrees. And I think because of my heat stroke, like it had broken the mechanism in my brain that knew how to modulate heat. And so just laying there in this pool of sweat for 3 days. And of course, I evacuated everything out of my body. And I was, literally dying. I mean, there's really no way I should have survived that experience, because I didn't have any medical assistance. There wasn't, in this village I was in northern India, there wasn't any help for me. I just visualized dying there, and they would have just thrown my body with 400 and something other bodies that day onto a big pile and lit us up with gasoline, because that's how India is. Death is not a big thing there, especially if you're anonymous. I would have told my friend, don't try to arrange to get my body shipped home and all that. Just leave it here, and sorry for all the trouble. Anyway, obviously I did not die, but I was horribly sick. And when I did finally get back to Minnesota, USA, I was as broken as a human being could be. I was reduced to like a little puddle of mush, like, I don't know how to live. I don't know what to do. I just don't know how to be a human being in this world. And luckily, a woman there took me under her wing. And I've always had these saints that have shown up in one form or another, always women. And she actually became my second wife and kind of nurtured me until I was strong enough to even imagine doing something like help make money or do whatever. So I remember just thinking, I have to plant a garden. I have to get my hands in the earth. I have to be nurtured by the earth and not me nurturing it nurturing me. And that went on for 18 years. So this is a period of time where this is when I was really deepening in my Course in Miracles study via being a teacher. But the thing that I was being shown to do was to get myself anchored in the earth, like, find a way to feel grounded, to feel connected, to feel loved in the world, not just, it's easy to have divine love, but a lot of people that are exposed to powerful divine love, they don't necessarily have a way to integrate that into their human experience. And they tend to oftentimes have more difficulty than not. In the old days, I don't think they do it as much now, but a lot of people like me would have been diagnosed as schizophrenic, and you end up in a mental ward somewhere and, giving you drugs to calm you down and get out of this, messianic delusion or, whatever they would interpret. Because again, our culture has never been very good, as say, compared to the Indian culture, in accepting the spiritual path as like, oh, this is like a normal thing. So, now things have changed a lot since the time that I was born in 1952. So, today, a lot of these things, just like this kind of a venue where people are talking about their near-death experiences, that wouldn't have happened 30, 40 years ago. I mean, it was still kind of hush hush and people are going to think you're crazy and all of that. So anyway, it took me 18 years of this to really get solid enough to where I knew, okay, I'm ready enough now where I can cut some of these ties with, the things that were sort of support systems, like cutting a tie with a therapist, but I cut the tie with my second wife. Thank you very much for doing your best to give me a sense of home and family and all that. But I knew, I mentioned before in our chat, I knew when I saw the second plane go into the tower in New York, 9/11, I knew, the download came, you got to get out. You have to get out of USA. And it wasn't because of 9/11. It was just because that for me, and I think for a lot of people, USA has a lot more challenges, a lot more interference patterns, the need to make money, the need to whatever, and just a lot more support for that egoic sense of either accomplishment or failure. And I just knew I need to find another land. They say there's an old quote from Thomas Wolfe about that, a land more kind than earth. And anyway, so I just had this sense, and so I started the process. It took me, again, several years. This whole thing has required a lot of patience for me to do some research, first trying a few places in USA, Sarasota, Florida, Asheville, North Carolina, a couple other places, but then realized I got to try something else. And I had just been influenced. It's interesting how, when you're really on the path, guidance will come in all kinds of ways, and you just really have to pay attention to it. And I remember I had this job working as a chef chauffeur for a wealthy woman who wintered down in Florida. And I remember just going to this opening of this film, this international grand opening of this film, the Mambo Kings sing songs of love. And I'd actually read the book, so I wanted to go to this opening. And I remember just going to that opening and hearing the Latin music, the Mambo stuff. It's from Cuba. And I remember thinking, there's something about Latin America that really seems appealing. And I didn't even know why, except I kind of liked the salsa music. So, but that and a couple other influences made me think, I'm going to go to Costa Rica. I've heard about Costa Rica. So anyway, the next 6 years, I found myself in a part-time job in Minnesota that I could work 6 months and then 6 months to travel. So I spent 2 years in Costa Rica, 2 years in Colombia, and then 2 years in Peru and Ecuador before choosing Ecuador and the place I'm at now for 10 years. So finding the place, that ended up being of such consequence, because I really don't believe, just knowing my personality, that I could do what I'm being called to do, what I'm doing now with you today, if I was still living in the USA. I think there would have been more distractions, more interference patterns, things that would easily, because I'm not, as a human being, I'm not really that strong in the sense that, because I'm cloistered, and this is why throughout time, a lot of monks and nuns have cloistered themselves in these monasteries and convents because they could do their spiritual practice at a deeper level without being engaged in the world. Like for the longest time now, I go to bed at 6 p.m., get up before 3 a.m. Part of that is it gives me much more stability, not to be involved in any of the things that are a social life or nightlife would be temptations like that. So anyway, I think that brings us up to now. I'll just mention the last death experience. It had to be one more little slap when I was 66. Here, the first year that I was here, I was working with a chainsaw up on a high ladder, working on a tree, and I had 3 volunteers with me, some kids from other countries here in South America. And I knew when I was working with a chainsaw, because I had a lot of experience with that as an arborist in the USA, that I was in a dangerous situation. I probably shouldn't cut this particular branch because another, and sure enough, what I thought could happen did happen. And this tree came and hit me, knocked me off a ladder. I was 20 feet up in the air, and I fell, I throw the chainsaw away from me and falling backwards, land on my back and on my head on a pile of rocks in the creek. And I'm laying there thinking at first, like, oh my God, I'm dead. I have to be dead. And then after maybe 20 seconds, I realized I'm not dead, but my body is like in excruciating pain because I think I've broken most of the bones in my back. And I'm just thinking, like, it's so amazing. I spent so many years working on this and that and the other thing, working on all my relationship issues and getting myself to this perfect place. And I have this perfect daughter. She was 2 years old at the time, and this really solid Ecuadorian wife. And I've got this paradise, and I've just screwed the pooch. If I'm not dead, I'm paralyzed. I mean, I'm not going to be able to be a normal person. And again, it was that last bit of humility where I just had to kind of lay there and just kind of laugh, kind of like cry, laugh, cry at the same time. Like, isn't that sad that came so far only to see it dissolve, disappear? Well, obviously it didn't dissolve, disappear at all. It was just the last time, I hope, the last time that guidance was going to say, pay attention. You don't need to do this anymore. Like we've done this now 4 times. We don't need to do this anymore. And that was clear after my recovery. And the thing that was interesting was, and this is something that hopefully some of your audience can comprehend, I think in the car accident situation and the situation in India, and this last situation, unlike the NDE where people were actually helping me recover, that there was another power much greater than me that oftentimes we would call God, that loved me so much that it would do miraculous healing on the spot. It's because by the time we got to the hospital, and they made me wait like about 4 hours on this wooden slab, because I went to the poor people hospital, the free hospital, and I'm sure they resented the fact that as a gringo, they assume every gringo is a millionaire, that I should go to a private clinic, not this hospital. So they just made me wait. And so, like I said, I was in a lot of pain, and a nurse wouldn't even come over and offer any assistance to a head wound that I had. I think they just probably said, screw you, gringo, we're just gonna let you die. Anyway, I didn't die, so finally they had to bring me for x-rays and an MRI, and they did. And the doctor came out and goes, there's nothing broken. And I just realized, like, holy fuck. It's like if I ever had any doubt ever before that by this time now, 33 years after my first death experience, now 66, that it's over. Any resistance that I'm going to try to throw in the way of this destiny, I'm done. I surrender for the second time. I surrender, and I'm just going to do it. And then, like I said, even then, I've had to wait close to 6 years to do it because, one thing or another, the studio wasn't ready or something. But anyway, the end of the happy ending of the story is that I'm here, I'm 72, I'm doing it. And again, as much as anybody wants to, even on their own, contact me. I'm happy to share my sort of teaching ministry. Like, I'm not doing this for fame or for money. Nobody needs to pay me anything to do what I'm called to do. But I know I'm here to assist at a very high level those who would see themselves walking a similar path of what I call the path of mastery. Because I know the essence of my teaching is that we are all called to a level of mastery, not any less than Jesus Christ himself. And it's possible for us collectively, because I think the second coming is this collective 1,000 points of light around the globe, where we step forward as masters that really understand how to wield this power. And we can literally, and we will literally change the world, basically birthing, like Eckhart Tolle would say, birthing a new earth. That even if all the stuff's going on, all the chaos, wars and whatever else is going on in that world, there's another world. And I know lots of people that have had these experiences, they know there's another world, but the whole point is to create that paradise here on Earth, not some etheric plane or another planet or whatever. At least that's been my guidance, that the work that we're called to do is to fully manifest this divine power that comes in the form of truth, beauty, love, to manifest that here, to make that the new reality that a lot of us prefer. We can't go back and live in, our former, egoic, anyway, so.
If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Well, I've got several Facebook pages, and I'm not sure if you have all of them in your little bio sheet. I think a couple of them at least. But either through my email or my Facebook pages, they can contact me directly. And I'm always happy to set up a video chat with somebody if they want to just chat a little bit, if they're interested just in having some online guidance and support from me, or if they're interested in coming here to Ecuador. Because what we've evolved here, this is what I've been occupied with the past 6 years, is basically creating the infrastructure. So we have a teaching center here. We have now these cabins built so we can have retreats here. We got spaces that we're building for volunteers to come. And so basically it's like I'm creating this, what I consider a utopia, and inviting other people to come. Again, whether they connect with me just online or come here. I've got several people just as a result of the 2 podcasts I've done so far that are on their way here. And just, I know there's room for 20 or 30, and we'll just start building more abodes. Not that I'm looking to have any kind of a big ashram kind of thing. That's not my personal ambition at all. That's partly why it was really important that I waited till I was 72. So I wouldn't be like tempted by, I have a 20-year vision or a 30-year ambition or whatever. It's like, I don't have that much time left. I'm happy if I promise my daughter I'll stay alive until she's 20. She's 8 now, so I've got a promise of 12 more years to my daughter. But yeah, it's I don't have a worldly ambition to be something special, and quite the opposite. But there are people that will hear my message and they'll get that idea that we can be simple, we can live a beautiful, simple life, and at the same time be wielding a great power. Because I think the world needs to shift into a world that embraces simplicity and embraces, community and family and, loving each other and, all those spiritual principles that everybody's familiar with. But I think that the world that's spinning out of control, my sense is, and this is something that if we have any time, I'll share a little bit of my prophecy, because I sort of have a little bit of a gift for prophecy, the things that I've seen since the early 2000s, that there's going to be some really big trouble for a lot of people coming up in the next year or so. And in my vision, there's a 7-year period that starts early next year that people need to hunker down and find a safe place. And so I built a pyramid here, and when I was building it, I thought, this is kind of like Noah building his ark. It wasn't meant to be a place for people to survive a flood, but just building a space that would be a safe place where I am here in the highlands of Ecuador. There's no way that an earthquake, a flood, tsunamis, nuclear war, anything is really going to affect people living here. Nothing. Now, the thing that I'm predicting, I don't know if you want to hear about it, It's called a Carrington event,
Okay.
and it's going to be a massive sun EMP, electromagnetic pulse. In fact, I wrote this book. My prophetic book was this little book called The Third Pulse. And so so I'm calling this event, so I predicted this back, say, I wrote this book back in 2005, I think. So I just sort of saw the end the last 20 years, and people were thinking, the Mayan calendar, 2012, nothing happened. Well, that's not really true. I mean, what we came to is just a stopping point, and then the Mayan calendar began again. And so this process starting in 2012, it's a 20-year process, which are the first two Ketuns. And during the first two Ketuns in the Mayan calendar, as much things happen in that 20-year period as will happen in the next several thousand years. So this intense period is the time where everything's going to get shaken up and reshuffled, and then everything calms down after 2032. But the key is for people that have ears to hear, find a safe place to be for 7 years. Get yourself in a place where you can appreciate what's happening, not be afraid of it. That's the whole thing that Eckhart Tolle, we talked about, that this new earth begins with a level of acceptance. So we can accept that this third pulse, whether it's the sun or a nuclear exchange, we can accept that this is coming. And if we're lucky, we can appreciate what it means, what opportunity is being offered. And the third stage of a new earth is enthusiasm. You can be enthusiastic about the end of the world, the end of that world, the world of the neocons and all the craziness. Some people that have ears to hear, eyes to see, they'll say, yeah, that's a good thing. We want that world to end so that this new earth can be birthed, and there's not this big conflict with, two factions. For the longest time, these guys have been in charge, but, anybody that's tapped into really strong spiritual guidance, the guidance is showing you that they don't have the power they think they have. Spiritual power is much greater than this human power, that's all based on fear, trying to get everybody scared. So again, I would just offer people an alternative is that if they really, truly want to find a sanctuary, and again, it might just be where they are, but just by plugging in, by finding a network where we're connected, that becomes like a sanctuary, because we have like-minded people that we know love us, and we can turn to them and they can turn to us. And the whole idea is that we can survive the 7 years together, and not just survive, but actually be flourishing, while the other things are deconstructing. So that's my vision, that's my destiny, that's my purpose. And like I say, I'm open to whoever wants to contact me. My whole life is devoted to this now. I don't have a job. I don't have to be out doing other things. I got my daughter. That's obviously a priority, but my biggest priority is fulfilling my function as a messenger, a spiritual conduit.
Louis, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Well, absolutely. I know that love is winning, and I know that truth is winning, and I know that beauty is winning. So we will not just survive, we will flourish. Anybody that's listening, I guarantee you that if you're open, to following your guidance, because again, part of guidance might be listening to what I'm saying today, that this message is a guarantee that this story has a happy ending. Personally, I know in my own personal journey is simply a microcosm of our collective journey. I know that.
Louis, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.